I think a lot of us forget how blessed we are to have modern technology and medicine. There are so many times throughout history where if we discovered an incurable disease, we would just put people on an island and that was how we solved the problem. For example, North Brother Island in New York housed the infamous Typhoid Mary and many other people with infectious diseases that we just didn't have any cure for yet. In our story today, the Kalaupapa colony, where we sent a lot of people with leprosy, is another great example of how we used to deal with disease. Hi, welcome to the channel, or welcome back. My name is Sydney, and if you are new here, this is a place where we can talk about true crime, spooky, scary stories, dark history, or anything else I got going on in my brain. We keep meeting like this, where it's been like months and then I just randomly reappear. Things are very overwhelming right now in general with everything. But either way, I have a lot of exciting stories and new projects coming up in 2026 that I hope I can finish to give you guys. But for now, let's talk about the Kalaupapa colony. And before we get into it, I looked up how to say Kalaupapa. I still don't think I'm saying it right. I apologize. I am not very good at pronouncing English words, and this is a Hawaiian word that I do not know how to say. So please forgive me. Let's get into the story. So before we really dig in, I want us to have a very clear idea of leprosy, what it is, how it transmits, all that good stuff. So Hansen's disease, or as it's more commonly known as leprosy, is a very old disease. It dates back about 4,000 years. If you're a science nerd like me and you'd like to know all the scientific names for things, this bacteria is known as Mycobacterium leprae, and this little bug can cause a number of symptoms, including patchy skin, enlarged nerves, purple nodules and lumps, sores, and ulcers. So it can be a very painful disease if left untreated. Although it's contagious, it's pretty damn hard to actually contract leprosy. You have to be in very close contact with somebody that has this disease for months on end. In fact, most healthy people's immune systems are able to fight off this disease even if they come in contact with it for a long period of time. But let's just say, for example, somebody gets leprosy, it's very curable. With about 6 months to a year of antibiotics, you can be completely leprosy free. That being said, if it's left untreated, there are very severe consequences such as paralysis, shortening of the fingers and toes, chronic pain, and even death. Right now, leprosy is active in about 120 different countries, with about 200,000 cases being reported each year. While in most countries, leprosy isn't something that we really think or worry about, it was heavily stigmatized throughout history. When I first started researching this, the example that immediately popped in my head is the Bible, right? I remember sitting in my Sunday school class when I was like 7 years old and having my Sunday school teacher talk about leprosy and the people that were inflicted with leprosy and how they were ostracized from the rest of their community. And little 7-year-old me was like, this is a real problem that I'm gonna have to face. Kind of like quicksand. You think it's gonna be a problem, but it's really not. That's how I felt about leprosy. But as an adult and as I was researching this case, I figured out that it is widely believed by many historians that the people that were writing the Bible just used the word leprosy to encompass all skin diseases. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Didn't know that. The Bible talks about how leprosy is a divine punishment for somebody's wrongdoings and that these people are seen as unclean. These people were forced to become beggars on the street, or sometimes they were even exiled, but people went so far as to not even touch them because they thought that they were so unclean. So throughout history, people take the teachings from the Bible and transfer it to real life and just automatically start ostracizing these people for something that they don't really understand. And if we fast forward to more modern times, we can still see people being exiled for having leprosy. There are many settlements throughout the United States, but by far the largest and most well-known is the Kalaupapa colony in Hawaii. So let's talk about it. Let's break it down. What was this place and what were they all about? One of the most remote islands in Hawaii is called Molokai, and within it sits the Kalaupapa village. It's separated from the rest of the island with a cliff on one side and the ocean on the other, so it is very remote. As the number of leprosy cases skyrocketed in Hawaii, the colony was formed in 1866 on the eastern side of the Kalaupapa Peninsula. Government officials decided to forcibly evict the residents who had been living there for over 900 years. Like, this was very native remote land. And the government was just like, nope, you can't live here anymore. We are seizing this. So everybody had to take their shit and get out. Some people were paid for their land and their homes, but others weren't compensated at all. Once the land was completely free of all the natives, the government began to ship leprosy-infected people to Molokai. An employee from the Board of Health became the superintendent of the colony, and he lived on the cliff high above the village, and he would kind of look over people, make sure that everything was running smoothly. From the outset, this was the perfect plan because residents had left all of their abandoned homes, there was farmland, so the leprosy-inflicted people could come in, move in, start tilling the land, getting their own crops. It became evident very quickly, though, that the people coming to Kalaupapa were in no shape to do any sort of manual work. I mean, when you think about it, you are not shipping healthy individuals to start a colony. These are people that are sick, and in the 1800s, there's no cure for leprosy. So these people were very much in pain. They were going through their symptoms, and this was just not going to work. And in the first few years of the colony's existence, many people did end up passing away. It was basically a death sentence to be sent to Kalaupapa. Word of the condition of Kalaupapa traveled back to the rest of the Hawaiian Islands. Friends and family of people that were afflicted with leprosy, they would end up sheltering these inflicted people within their homes to prevent them from getting seized and taken to Kalaupapa. Like, it's just, it was so sad. In other cases, friends and family of the sick would actually go with the person to Kalaupapa in order to be a caretaker, which, can you imagine that? The Board of Health is noticing that a lot of people are dying, and they're like, we should probably do something about this, right? So they constantly started sending in supplies, food, water, all that good stuff. They built a hospital, and they helped construct new homes. Let's fast forward to 1873, right? In comes a priest named Father Damien, and he comes in and turns the entire Kalaupapa colony on its head. He saw the conditions happening within this colony and was like, hell fucking no. He immediately jumped in. He helped build houses. He created a whole ass water system to help get clean water to the colony, and he obviously helped the sick. And as word traveled throughout the churches, other priests and members of the church ended up also traveling to Kalaupapa, and they created this blossoming community, right? They were all fundamental in helping to strengthen and build schools. They created extracurriculars, and of course, they reinforced the strength of the church as well. After 12 years on the island, Father Damien did end up contracting leprosy just from being in close contact with the sick all the time, and he died in 1889. He was truly a light and an advocate for all of the villagers of Kalaupapa. So I thought that was definitely worth noting here. From the years of 1888 to 1902, the number of people living in Kalaupapa had grown to about 1,100. By this time, there were still a very few amount of native residents living on Molokai, and they were bought out by the Board of Health so that they could expand the leprosy colony. They started expanding, building better homes, dorms, hospitals. They even updated their water line system so the water could keep being accessible, and they expanded more to the Western Peninsula because it had better living conditions, which would be better for the sick. And although living conditions were getting better every day, I don't want you guys to forget what it was like for the people living on Kalaupapa, right? Like, when they got to the island, women were separated from men, children were separated from their parents, babies were either given to family or relatives that were obviously not on the island, or they were just given straight up to orphanages. For those that did come alone, it was just as hard because everything that they knew, everything that they loved, was basically ripped from them when they were shipped off to this island. So no matter who you were, it was not an easy life. Family and friends were allowed to visit, but they had to stay in separate quarters, and they could only talk to their loved ones through a chicken wire screen. So it's not like you got to hug your family after not seeing them for a year. You know what I mean? Like, it was horrible. In the early 1900s, we start to see a push for treatment and cures for leprosy. In fact, in 1909, a research facility opened up on Kalaupapa, and they wanted the leprosy-inflicted people to come and test out new drugs, new cures, new treatments. That being said, though, a lot of the residents declined being tested on. They didn't want to be lab rats, which totally understandable. So the facility did shut down a few years after its opening. By the 1920s, the population of Kalaupapa had went down to about 45. And by the mid-1930s, it was clear that the construction and the foundation of a lot of these houses just weren't cutting it anymore. The program was reorganized and a new power and water system were built, roads were put in, houses, stores, and hospitals were also revamped to just kind of make it a nicer place to live. So yay, it's the 1940s, and something called sulfone drugs are released to the public, and they are found to be a really great treatment and cure for leprosy. And by 1946, these drugs became accessible to all of the people of Hawaii. 20 years later, in 1969, with leprosy now being very, very treatable, the isolation laws were lifted off Kalaupapa colony, and people were allowed to freely leave. Discussions were had about what they should do with that land. A lot of people just wanted to shut it down completely, shut the whole village down, but it was ultimately decided that the villagers could decide if they wanted to stay there or if they wanted to leave. And a lot of people did end up staying on Kalaupapa. Some feared being stigmatized for their appearance because they did have scars on their skin, and others were just more comfortable here. It was now the home that they knew and loved, and it was more comfortable for them to stay put. As of 2015, of the 8,500 people that stayed on Kalaupapa, only 6 of them remained. I think this story is so fascinating. Obviously, I think Typhoid Mary, her story is pretty popular. That bitch was spreading her shit around. But you don't really hear about leprosy colonies, especially in the United States. I thought that it was more a thing in the Eastern countries, and that might be ignorant for me to think and say, but that was just my thought going into this. But to learn that in the United States, up until the 1970s, we were isolating people on an island for having leprosy blew my mind. So I want to know what you guys think about this story. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Feel free to subscribe, comment if you did. I'd love to hear feedback. If you have any video suggestions, I'd also love to hear that. I'm always open to suggestions. So, on that note, be safe out there. Please, please, please be safe out there. Keep being the bad bitches that you are. By the